On the morning of June 4, 1942, the Pacific Ocean looked completely normal. Calm water stretching out in every direction. Nothing on the surface to suggest that the fate of the largest war in human history was about to be decided. Nothing to suggest that within a few hours the most powerful naval force on Earth would be burned, shattered, and sent to the bottom of the sea. And the most terrifying part of all was that this moment never should have happened. It wasn't part of a perfect plan or an advanced strategy or some flawless American operation. It came from a simple mistake, a tiny oversight, a small decision made at the wrong time by the wrong man on the wrong deck, and that one mistake opened a window that history almost missed. A window so brief it should have closed before anyone could use it. But on that morning, an American pilot would see it, trust it, and turn it into the most devastating advantage of the entire war, because far out in the Pacific, the Japanese carrier fleet, the same fleet that had crushed Pearl Harbor, now moved silently through the water. 4 massive aircraft carriers packed with skilled pilots, fueled planes, torpedoes, bombs, deck crews, and the greatest confidence Japan had ever held, commanded by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, a man who had completed every mission he had ever been given, a man who believed the enemy was already broken, who believed Midway would be taken easily, who believed the Americans were too weak and scattered to offer real resistance, and yet hidden hundreds of miles away, 3 American carriers waited in silence, outnumbered and outmatched, placed there by a risky decision based on a single intercepted message, a coded reference to AF that American intelligence had identified as Midway, a secret that Japan never knew had been uncovered. And so, as the sun rose that morning, Nagumo-S planes lifted into the air in perfect formation and streaked toward Midway Atoll, bombs strapped under wings, sun glinting off canopies, engines roaring in perfect rhythm, while below, the decks of his carriers were left crowded with aircraft preparing for a second strike. Bombs stacked, fuel lines connected, torpedoes prepared, a delicate, dangerous ballet of explosives and gasoline all compressed onto floating wooden platforms. And that was where the mistake began. Because when reports came back that Midway had not been fully destroyed, Nagumo hesitated. And in war, hesitation is the most dangerous thing of all, and he made a decision that seemed logical but would become fatal. He ordered the bombs on deck to be changed from land attack to ship attack, believing American carriers might be nearby. And in that moment, his entire fleet was frozen in a state of transition, half loaded for one mission, half for another, fuel lines running, bombs moved, planes shifted, decks cluttered. A process that should have been done either before or after the attack, never during, but no one around him told him to stop. No. One realized what that meant, and above in the sky, American torpedo planes arrived first, slow, outdated, almost helpless. One by one they were cut down by Japanese fighters and anti-air fire, until entire squadrons were wiped out in minutes, men going straight into the ocean in burning wreckage, their sacrifice looking like a complete and total failure. But what no one yet realized was that those doomed torpedo bombers had pulled all the Japanese fighters down low, dragging the air cover toward the sea, leaving the sky above the carriers completely open, and high above, so high the Japanese never saw them, American dive bombers arrived, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, who should not have even been in that position, who had followed a lone Japanese destroyer by instinct when he had no other clue where the enemy fleet was. And that simple choice, that one small decision to follow a white wake across a blue ocean, led him and his squadron directly above the most vulnerable fleet on the planet, and at 10:22 in the morning, looking through his cockpit into a sight no American pilot could believe, McCluskey saw 4 enemy carriers directly below him, decks packed, explosions just waiting to happen, and without hesitation he rolled his plane upside down and entered a vertical dive straight toward the largest warships he had ever seen. Air screaming around his cockpit, the world rushing past him, Japanese anti-air guns firing wildly, black clouds of flak erupting around him. But he did not pull up, and neither did the men behind him. One after another, American bombers folded toward the enemy at impossible angles, and then the first bomb hit, smashing through the deck of the carrier cargo into the hangar below, detonating among fueled planes, torpedoes, bombs, igniting the heart of the ship in a single flash. Another bomb struck the Akagi near Nagumo's command center, instantly turning his flagship into a furnace. Another tore open Soryu, sending flames racing down passageways, and in seconds the deck crews, the pilots, the officers, the command structure of the Imperial Japanese Navy were consumed by a firestorm that felt like the surface of the sun, Men leaping into the sea to escape, others trapped in corridors turned into ovens. The fleet that had ruled the Pacific reduced to an inferno floating on oil and wreckage, all because the decks were full, all because bombs had been moved at the wrong hour, all because Nagumo hesitated instead of waiting or launching immediately. And in that tiny delay, history carved a wound that never healed. Because within minutes 3 Japanese carriers were fatally burning, smoke columns rising thousands of feet into the sky, visible from miles away, while American pilots screamed into their radios in disbelief that the impossible had just happened, that in a single strike the balance of an entire war had shifted, and although one remaining carrier, Hiryu, managed to launch a counterattack and badly damage the American carrier Yorktown, even that final act of retaliation was crushed by another wave of American dive bombers that found Hiryu later that afternoon and reduced it to the same burning fate as the others, leaving 4 sunken giants of the sea resting on the ocean floor where hours earlier Japan had believed itself untouchable, and far away in Tokyo, when the first fragmented reports came in, when officers saw words like missing, burning, lost, they refused to accept it, believing the enemy was lying, that a disaster of that scale was impossible. But as the truth became undeniable, as confirmation after confirmation arrived, Japan realized in horror that the core of its naval air power had been erased in a single day, replaced by a terrifying silence where pride and dominance had once lived, and that silence would echo through every future battle, because while Japan could still fight, it could no longer dominate the skies or seas the way it once had, and in that realization the simple mistake became clear, the mistake of underestimating an enemy, of relying on outdated assumptions, of pausing at the wrong time, of choosing the wrong bomb for the wrong target at the wrong moment. And while history would later analyze radar and intelligence and aircraft and ranges and statistics, the truth was much smaller and much more human than numbers on a page. It was doubt. It was hesitation. It was a single decision made in a moment of uncertainty that created the most perfect opportunity imaginable for an enemy who refused to waste it. And from that day forward, everything began to change. American confidence returned, factories doubled production, pilots trained faster, fleets expanded, and Japan moved slowly but permanently onto the defensive, clinging to desperate strategies while the Allied tide rolled closer and closer to its shores. And all across the Pacific, soldiers who had heard about Midway now carried the belief that the enemy was not invincible, that mistakes could be turned into openings, that even the strongest force in the world could be broken by a moment of vulnerability, and the Battle of Midway entered history not as just another engagement, but as the day information outpaced power, the day awareness beat dominance, the day a simple mistake became a deadly advantage that reshaped the entire world. Because without that small error on that carrier deck in the middle of the ocean, the war in the Pacific could have stretched on for years longer, costing millions more lives, reshaping nations, altering borders, changing the future of humanity itself. And as the sun set on that water filled with oil and wreckage and the silent graves of thousands of men, no one could possibly understand the full consequences yet, only that something irreversible had happened, something that could never be undone. A domino had fallen that would knock down an empire, and that is why the story of Midway is not just a military lesson. It is a lesson in life, in timing, in awareness, in the danger of pride, and in the power of being ready when opportunity appears. Because sometimes the difference between defeat and victory, between survival and destruction, between history and oblivion, is only one simple mistake noticed by the right person at the right moment.